back. I'm Louisa and I'm holding a coffee because we are doing a Gilmore Girls themed video today. And can you talk about Gilmore Girls without holding a cup of coffee? I don't think so. I'm one of those people who has rewatched Gilmore Girls too many times. Too many to count. So today I am recommending books based on your favorite Gilmore Girls character. We're doing a bookish recommendations video. So the characters I will be doing today are exclusively female, the main ones, but I'd love to do another one for the Gilmore boys, or if you're a big fan of Kirk, although Kirk is probably a main character at this point, who am I kidding?
So familiar, I guess I didn't check the facts.
If your favorite character is Lorelai, you're sharp, you're witty, you're upbeat, you don't slow down, and you probably don't read a lot. Lorelai doesn't read a lot, surprisingly, for all the books that are mentioned in the series and all the pop culture references, and Lorelai makes the majority of them probably. Lorelai doesn't really read a lot. I think she's the kind of person who would go out and read the super hyped new releases that are also critically acclaimed. The books that people say, you know, if you're not reading this, you're not aware of what is happening around you. And she would also probably have read some classics and some books that are of particular interest to her, perhaps like for her business degree, but she's not the biggest reader. So if you're a Lorelai fan, I will start by recommending a book about her traumatic childhood. She has a really problematic relationship with her parents, which is very comedic to watch, but we can tell that for Lorelai as a person, it's a really big deal and a really big problem, and she takes it quite seriously. And she talks about it a lot. So I will recommend a great book for this. Finished it a couple of days ago. Why Be Happy When You Can Be Normal by Jeanette Winterson. This was published in 2011 by Vintage. The upbringing of Jeanette Winterson makes Emily and Richard seem like the patron saints of parenting. Jeanette's childhood, and especially her relationship with her mother, defined who she was, and in this book she's trying to get her identity back in a way. An incredible book about identity, about navigating your upbringing as a queer child, trying to find yourself, accept yourself, learn how to love. That's a really big theme because she didn't have love in her house really, so she had to learn how to love as an adult. Also, because she was an adopted child, that also came into play. The end result is a very wise book. I think you will love this book. Now, in the revival, we saw that Lorelai had read Wild by Cheryl Strayed, and she really liked it because she almost wanted to go to the trail and hike it. If you're like Lorelai, you would love a book that is hyped for good reason because it is engrossing and important. And that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is a debut novel you won't be able to put down. Its protagonist is a young woman who is navigating life in her 20s after graduating from college with job insecurity and a boyfriend and things like that, and racism. Gilmore Girls is very white. It's an incredibly smartly woven narrative that exposes the dynamics of privilege. White privilege, male privilege, wealth privilege. Do you see a connection with Lorelai here? I think this is such a great book. It's an important read as well, and it is a page turner. Okay, the third one may be a bit controversial, but bear with me. If you love Lorelai, you probably love getting takeaway or eating Luke's Diner. And that has to be a problem for Lorelai, both for her health and her budget. This book is the read for you, and it is Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. Please don't click away. This is not a sort of book that preaches vegetarianism or veganism, but it is about meat because meat is such a huge part of the modern American diet. Gilmore Girls takes place in America, so they do eat a lot of meat. This is a fascinating and very readable account of the different aspects of eating meat as a cultural choice, lifestyle choice, and practically an industrial phenomenon. So it kind of approaches it from different perspectives because there are discussions, interviews with people who work in factory farms, people who are smaller farmers, people who eat meat, people who don't eat meat. It's not approached from one perspective, and he really did put a lot of work into it because he talked to a lot of people, and it's really not a book that tells you to do anything. It gives you a good perspective of the various different sides of the situation as it is now, and it lets you make your own decisions. And I think it's a really interesting, well-written, and important book, regardless of what your eating habits are and regardless of whether you're interested in changing them or not. And I believe it was Jonathan Safran Foer's first foray into nonfiction. He had only published fiction before, so his writing is really engaging and interesting. So those are the 3 books I recommend if you love Lorelai.
Could have been clearer. I made a joke and no one laughed.
I decided to raise the ISO because it looked quite dark. So sorry about that. Now we're moving on to Lane Kim. I love Lane. Lane is one of my favorite characters. If you love Lane, you're very cool, and I'd probably be in love with you because Lane is strong. She survived growing up with Mrs. Kim, and she is quietly a rebel. She loves punk, rock, any interesting genre between the 60s and the 90s. Lane knows it all. She's a music nerd. She is a self-taught drummer. She forms her own boy band. She forms a band with 3 other guys, so she is a bit of the definition of like the pick-me girl, but authentically. She is funny and she's a great friend to Rory. Rory doesn't deserve Lane after a certain point. I think that's kind of a flaw in the script, but to the audience it looks like Rory is a bit of a dick to Lane. So the first book I'm gonna recommend if your favorite character is Lane is Just Kids by Patti Smith, published in 2010. That one won the National Book Award and launched Patti Smith's career as a writer. It was really her writing poetry that led to her writing lyrics, but Just Kids made her a memoirist as well. Patti Smith, like Lane, was a bit of a rebel. She left her home young and she moved to New York. She didn't have any support from anyone else except she had a really close friend who was initially her boyfriend, but they remained lifelong best friends. The famous photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, who was living with her in New York City, and they were trying to make it together as artists, and it was the 70s, and she was literally the definition of cool, and that is what the book is about, really. It's structured around her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe, but it's about being young and exploring New York and becoming an artist and working to make it, hanging out at the Chelsea Hotel and meeting Janis Joplin, and among others, because she meets a lot of cool music people in this book, and it's so much fun. And if you love music and you're a music nerd, then you're gonna love reading this book and hearing all the interesting things that were happening in that scene in the 70s. I read it a few years ago and I think maybe I should read it again. Okay, a second Lane recommendation will be one of my favorite books of all time, another memoir. This was published in 2018. It was one of those books that you saw everywhere, and for good reason. It's Educated by Tara Westover. It's really one of my favorite books of all time, and it's a book that I'd recommend to everyone on earth. Again, another book that makes Mrs. Kim look like a model parent. And I say this without really being able to decide in my head which childhood was worse, Jeanette Winterson's or Tara Westover's. It's difficult to choose, really. If you read both books, let me know what you think, because I really can't make up my mind about that one. Now, Tara Westover was raised in a survivalist Mormon family that differed a lot from the other Mormon families in the area. She grew up in a town with a population of around 300 people, at least with like the 2018 figures, in Clifton in Idaho. They didn't let her go to school. She was homeschooled, but she wasn't really homeschooled. So basically she was self-taught. Now, this book is about surviving and escaping and being defined by your upbringing, and Tara Westover is truly, it's admirable how she went from never having been to school, basically living in an abusive environment, both physically abusive and mentally abusive environment. It wasn't really Mormonism that her family was following. It was Tara's father's interpretation of Mormonism with his own personal paranoia about certain issues, and they didn't like the medical establishment. And so they didn't seek medical help even when they had serious accidents. It's a pretty extreme upbringing, so it's all the more impressive that Tara made it to university by teaching herself, and then she got a PhD, and then she wrote this book. It's an incredible story. It's so engrossing. It's written in a way that really makes you not be able to put the book down. It deserves all the praise it has gotten and more, and I think this is a perfect lane read. I think a lot of the spirit of rebelling and being able to leave your past behind and accept it and move on and do your own thing is really the vibe of this book. Another reason why I think this is such a good lane recommendation is because Tara Westover, in many interviews about her book, talks about learning how formal education, although it's important, there are many ways that it could be improved. What should be the priority more than it is now is to foster love of learning, and I think that's very interesting and very important coming from a person who really struggled because they didn't go to school. And I totally, oh my god, this is probably my favorite book in this entire list. I'm gonna move on to the one, the only, the controversial.
Get those seconds back.
Rory Gilmore. I think a lot of Gilmore Girls fans, especially during the first seasons, viewed her as a role model. She's bookish, she is young, naive, but at the same time so mature, so wise when it comes to people. But Rory takes Will Red to the next level. She is intelligent, but she's not just intelligent, she is obsessed with learning, and she's a huge nerd. So all of these things I think make any huge fan of Gilmore Girls very disappointed with the development of Rory in the series. And I could talk about Rory in a different video because that would take ages, but I just want to point out that Rory in the revival for me is really taking that character off their path. So if you love Rory, you have read probably every classic that there is to read, so I cannot recommend a classic for you. But what I can recommend is this video should be called Recommending Memoirs Based on Gilmore Girls Characters. I think you will love How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee. If you like Rory, you're probably a high achiever, you're ambitious and you're diligent and you love writing, and you are potentially interested in pursuing writing as a career, or you just really enjoy writing. This is an essay collection published in 2018. It's different recollections and different reflections on different times in Alexander Chee's young life. This is a book about growing from student to teacher, from reader to writer, and reckoning with his identity as a gay man, a Korean American, a son, a friend, a lover, an activist, an artist. Again, another book about identity. Rory is a bit lost in general with regards to what she wants to do, especially when she gets the shock in the revival where she's like, oh my god, I wanted to be a journalist, I'm not a journalist, what am I gonna do? And unlike Rory, Alexander Chee did not come from immense socioeconomic privilege, which I think is another reason this makes it an interesting read if you're a fan of Rory. It's something he addresses, and I think it's something that, especially having seen how Rory became a really spoiled person in the revival. She already was, but in the revival she's almost not acknowledging it at all. It's really weird, and she complains that she's failing in everything, but really, I mean, part of it is the industry, the way writing and journalism work today. It's really competitive and really difficult because print journalism is dying, if not already dead. But it also is that Rory is really not aware of the immense privilege she has. Okay, second pick for Rory is a big fat book. The biography of Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. Now, Walter Isaacson is the guy that has written a biography on Steve Jobs, on Einstein. He has a recent one out. I don't remember what his latest one is. It's a woman this time, finally. When you think artist, genius artist, usually your mind will think of Da Vinci. I think I read this book because I realized all of the things I didn't know about Leonardo da Vinci, and suddenly I realized, oh my god, this is not just a great genius painter. What distinguished Leonardo da Vinci was that he actually was so thirsty for knowledge and learning and curious, and he just constantly wanted to chase his curiosity and see where it leads him. And he was actually much more invested in his engineering inventions and pioneering ideas, which he had many. He was also an expert in anatomy, and he did actual field work. But something that's very interesting about this biography over previous ones is that Walter Isaacson looks at his personal notebooks. He talks a lot about the person himself and uses his notebooks as a major resource for writing this book. It's a great time, and it is a person in love with the pursuit of knowledge, which Rory also is. Third book recommendation, Bookworm, a memoir of childhood reading by Lucy Mangan, published in 2018 by Vintage, I believe. If books were your favorite thing when you were younger, or generally if they were an aspect of your childhood, this book is like a sweet nostalgic walk down memory lane. Really, Lucy Mangan writes about how her childhood reading shaped her, and she goes over the different books she read and what she thought of and her reflections on like libraries. It's basically just going back into your favorite childhood reading experiences and feeling everything all over again. It really made me realize how magical stories were when I was younger. They were such a big deal. They were such a big part of my day. Just making up stories, sitting there, imagining things, writing them down, being transported by stories. You kind of go back into that mode of thinking for a while, and it's so much fun. And also, so yeah, the caption of this book is a memoir of childhood reading, and it really is that. And oh my god, it's another memoir. Anyway, this book is like a warm blanket and a cup of coffee. Nice cozy comfort read, a nice time. It's great. Okay, moving on to Emily Gilmore, and Emily is a character that I actually have beef with.
Wish I could take it back now.
Okay, I get it. She's iconic.
Very intelligent.
Very witty, sharp, quite sarcastic, quite a pessimistic character. She's funny. She definitely has a dark sense of humor. But the way she's glorified, she's such an abusive parent. If she's your favorite character, I think there are some things we need to talk about. I'm still gonna recommend 2 excellent books. They're not memoirs, right? Wait, let me check.
Oh.
This is editing me, and I have to preface this by saying you cannot talk about Emily without talking about class. So both of these books, class dynamics are at the very center of them, either because of the author and the writing style and who they are addressing, or because of the actual topic of the book. That's really important to mention, because Emily Gilmore is a white, upper class American woman married to a rich like insurance guy. Both of them really do not live in the real world in many ways, and they make a point about flaunting that, and the series has this ongoing dialogue between Lorelai mocking her parents for it, and her parents being like, yeah, well, we're still more powerful and richer and just better than everyone else. But this book is How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia by Mohsin Hamid. Oh my god, it's so good. I knew the author from Exit West, which was published most recently. It was nominated for the Booker Prize. And this book is such an Emily read. It is page-turning, sarcastic, funny, well, tragic at the same time. It's written in the second person, which is really unusual. Its form parodies the self-help genre, and the author is telling you what to do, giving you instructions. And it really depicts the realities of living in a third world country, which I don't like calling countries third world. I learned that it's much more accurate and helpful to break down countries and their economies in 4 levels. So he shows the realities, the stark contrast between most people and then the privileged few, how to go from one side to the other, and just the realities of poverty, and at the same time the reality of life, its scope. This book goes from the protagonist being young to the protagonist being old and almost dying. And a great book in general, a great book for Emily, and such a great author.
Moving on to the second recommendation. If you love Emily,
I feel like the author of this memoir is Emily in the journalist writer's skin, and that is Joan Didion, and we have The Year of Magical Thinking. This is a sad book. Emily is sad, especially in the revival, because Richard has passed away. And do you ever feel like Emily is genuinely in a good mood? Like, to me, it seems like she is always in a bad mood. She's always upset. She's always unhappy. There's always something that isn't right. So I feel like the Joan Didion vibe will really appeal to you if you are a fan of Emily. That is not an insult, I promise. This is the first memoir that Joan Didion wrote. Joan Didion was known for her journalistic nonfiction, and she was a journalist and an author, but she wrote nonfiction primarily. She had a novel out as well, which I've read, Play It As It Lays, but she didn't write memoirs. And then she really abruptly lost her husband. She wrote about grief and how she dealt with it. But as always, because it's Joan Didion, it's nothing trite. Almost relentlessly honest, forthright approach to grief, that gives it so much power. It is heart-wrenching, it's sad. I mean, it's a book about losing your husband abruptly, but it's really unique, and if you haven't read Joan Didion, I think you should give her a try, because she has her own trademark style. And speaking of style, she is a style icon. She has been the face of a Celine campaign. She also worked at Vogue when she started writing, and I think this is such an Emily thing as well. And I think the other thing they have in common is that they both seem quite cynical in some ways. And on that note, we're moving to the final character for this recommendations video. This is my personal favorite character. I know a lot of people's favorite character is Paris Eustace Geller.
7 where I counted down from 2 and my embarrassment.
If you love Paris, and if you're like Paris, you have very strong opinions on what you should read and why, and you have probably read everything that there is to read. Like, Paris is the most well-read and the most intelligent person in the series, in my opinion. Her mind works at a speed that is beyond comprehension. She has read very widely. Who double majors in pre-med and law? Like, Paris, because Paris is so driven that it is to her own detriment. And you know, sometimes stress really takes over and she is just overwhelmed. Unlike Rory, all this talent and her abilities and, you know, her intelligence comes with drawbacks. She does suffer from stress, from not having sufficiently worked on her emotions. We see a person with real flaws, and I think it's much more realistic than, you know, the whole Rory debacle. So Paris has all of these amazing abilities, and she's really smart and she's really, really sharp, but at the same time, she's always really stressed and she always worries about the next thing. She's never present in the moment. If you notice, whenever something good happens to Paris, Paris is like,
But what if this, and what if that, and what does that mean now? Like,
there is a book that I think you absolutely need, and it's also a book that I very recently finished, and this actually is a book that would benefit anyone on earth. A Monk's Guide to Happiness, Meditation in the 21st Century by Gyalong Thupten. So I bought this book in a whim because it was recommended at the bookstore that I went to, and I bought it because it has Benedict Cumberbatch's blurb on it. You know what? It was a good choice. It is testament to a good book on a subject as unapproachable as meditation, because meditation I think is intimidating for many people, that a book works on an absolute beginner, a person who is clueless on the subject. This particular monk, in fact, lived a lifestyle that was the radical opposite of what being a monk what you would imagine the monk doing. And he studied at Oxford. He lived like the party life in New York City, and in his very early 20s he went to a Buddhist monastery in Scotland to recover because he could not handle psychologically, he couldn't handle his life. You know, such a vibe for 2020, but anyway. And he basically, I think he fell in love with the way of life and he ended up becoming a monk. He talks a lot about how we live in a very fast-paced world, in a culture of grasping, which he thinks creates a lot of dissatisfaction, mental distress. We create these feelings of lack where we're always grasping for something that we don't have. And as soon as we get it, we want more because we're not able to kind of stabilize ourselves and be content in the present moment. And meditation is a lot about that. And he really dispels a lot of the myths around meditation as well. He explains that it's not about turning off the world and kind of emptying your mind and just being in kind of like in a void. It's actually practically the opposite. I started trying to meditate. It's not easy, but it's not something that anyone knows how to do without trying to do it, if that makes any sense. Like, it's not like you're doing it wrong if you find it difficult. So he really makes it approachable, and he has so many recommendations of different kind of exercises, mindfulness exercises and meditation, and he just makes everything really approachable and really soothing and really calm. Oh, and I think we all need this, but especially anyone who relates to Paris in any way. This is a great way to end this video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out with me.